Welcome to another program in our series, Freethinking Forum. I'm Bill Weir, the producer and host, and I'm delighted to have with me today my friend Ryan Winkler. Thank you, Ryan, for joining us.
I'm happy to be here, Bill. Thanks for having me.
You're my representative, but you're also the DFL Majority Leader. And
That's true.
That is a great responsibility I know you can handle. So, do you want to say anything about that? You were selected unanimously by the DFL caucus?
Well, I can't reveal what the vote total was because I wasn't, I don't know, but we had right after the election, we had a meeting where we had to choose our next speaker and our next majority leader, since we had won a majority in the Minnesota House. And the caucus leader, Melissa Hortman, was elected to be speaker.
Great.
And I was one of two candidates to be majority leader, and my caucus picked me.
Wonderful.
So it puts me in the number 2 spot in the State House of Representatives.
Yes.
And responsibility for our legislative agenda, chairing the Committee on Rules, and making sure that our plan on the floor to pass bills goes smoothly.
Good. And I need to know, can you explain the Minnesota Values Plan that you're working on?
Sure. So in the 2016 election, when Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton and Minnesota Democrats did pretty badly at the polls, the House Democrats figured that we needed to understand where we were going wrong with the public. What were we doing that was not connecting with voters? And so what we did is we went out across the state in town hall forums, community conversations, getting out of the state capitol and getting out of the typical political circles and going to talk directly to Minnesotans, and not with our ideas about what programs should be passed, but to ask them what challenges, what opportunities, what problems they're facing in their lives, and what kind of Minnesota they'd like to see. And what people told us overwhelmingly is that the basic things that they're looking for, like a good education for their kids, affordable, accessible health care, a transportation system that meets the needs of the community, neighborhoods that are safe, and communities that are inclusive and welcoming. They said that those were the things that they would like to see. And they said that they didn't want just health care for themselves, they wanted affordable health care for their neighbors and for their fellow community members as well. And so when we went through and had these conversations, certain themes kept coming back over and over and over again. Things like affordable, accessible health care, great education for all kids in all parts of the state, infrastructure that works for transportation all over the place, broadband in rural Minnesota, the kind of infrastructure that helps communities grow and prosper, clean water. And they talked to us about the need for safe and inclusive communities. So having gone around the state and listened, we started putting together a series of value statements about what Minnesota wants and what the Minnesota Democratic House Caucus is going to be putting forward for an agenda and what priorities we would have. And within each of these priority areas or these value statements, we started trying to put together policies that we thought would serve those needs. And that was the core of what our campaign was about. And when we went around the state asking for votes, we talked about these issues. And now that we're in the majority and governing, we're going to continue to try to address these same issues. And so when we, as the Minnesota House DFL Caucus, laid out our top 10 bill agenda for this session, it turns out that it follows the Minnesota Values Plan all the way down the line. So in healthcare, we have, we want to create a public buy-in for Minnesota Care, which essentially creates a public option for healthcare for everybody who wants to be part of it. We're focused also on bringing down the cost of prescription drugs because that's a huge barrier for costs. And as costs in healthcare go up, people's ability to access healthcare goes down. On education, we focused on what we call the Great Start Initiative, which is to provide resources for kids 0 to 3 so that their families can have affordable childcare and that kids have high quality early learning starting at 0 to 3, which are the kids most in need, especially those in poverty. We also, as part of our education agenda on the values plan, are focused on community support services in schools. So counselors, mental health therapy, the kind of support that students need to be successful in schools, and where kids are getting not enough, frankly. Minnesota is something like 48th in the country in the ratio of counselors per student.
Oh, we need more counselors.
So we need more counselors, we need more mental health in schools. We laid out a $70 million package for broadband expansion, and we also introduced bills to change the sexual harassment standard so that we make sure that women are able to and not just women, but primarily women are able to be protected in the workplace, and 2 pieces of gun safety legislation. So we're going to move forward on bills to create universal background checks and what is called a red flag bill. So people who are exhibiting signs of extreme emotional instability, there's some resource available or recourse available to deal with guns. So safe and inclusive communities, world-class transportation and education, and affordable and accessible health care. That's the program we're coming forward with, and that's what's going to be guiding our legislative agenda this year.
Great. I think that sounds perfect from my perspective.
Good.
Sure, you could throw a few more things in there, but those are the fundamentals that we need to get in really good shape.
Yeah, that's what we think.
For the people of Minnesota and for businesses that might want to locate here.
Yes.
Or stay here. So are these the top priorities then, or is there anything else you'd add?
Well, so this is our forward-looking agenda. These are the things. Oh, I failed to mention economic security, paid family and medical leave, and earned sick and safe time for workers. So that's another part of our agenda going forward. So those are the forward-looking pieces we want to enact. Minnesota is the only state in the country, however, with a divided legislature. Republicans control the Minnesota Senate by 1 vote, and Democrats control the Minnesota House, and of course we have a Democratic governor in Tim Walz. So while this agenda, this values plan, is forward-looking and what we want to do as much of it as we can this year, but we know it may take 2, 4, 6, 8 years to enact a lot of this.
And hopefully with a Senate majority.
Hopefully with a Senate majority, but now we have a Senate Republican majority, and so we have to see where we can make progress on these issues. And that raises the whole question of we have a state budget that we have to pass for the next 2 years this session, and we have significant long-term challenges in the stability of the state budget. We have tax cuts that are going to be going to cost us a lot more money in future years and spending, and an economy that's slowly declining. So top session priorities, in addition to forward-looking things, are going to be managing the state budget and making sure that we're able to invest in the things that we care about, like health and education. But we also have to deal with budget problems in the healthcare area, because there's a provider tax that is going to sunset this year.
The 2%?
Yeah, and it will take about $800 million out of our healthcare budget, which is a huge problem for the healthcare services that the state provides, including for seniors, for people with disabilities, the poorest Minnesotans with healthcare. So that's a significant challenge. So I think of the legislative session being about trying to move forward as much as we can on the values plan, but also recognizing that we have basic things that we have to take care of and resolve this year. And so there's a whole range of issues that we have to try to just deal with right now while we're trying to look forward as much as we can.
Great. So you were out knocking on doors along with your many, many supporters this year, and probably even went with some of the members of the caucus too.
I did a lot of that.
Yeah. So what did you hear most from the voters? Is that incorporated in Minnesota Values Plan?
Well, when you start to talk to people about what's concerning them in their lives, in their personal lives, they bring up things like healthcare and childcare access and issues like that. But if you just go to the door and say, I'm a candidate or I'm working for a candidate, and they start to think about politics, the thing that concerns them the most is the deep divide in the country and their dislike of what's going on with this president and what's going on in Washington, D.C. You know, when you go door to door, you talk to Democrats, you talk to Republicans, you talk to a lot of independents, and the overwhelming sentiment people heard was that I heard was a lot of concern and disgust with
the federal politics.
With the federal politics, and that drove the whole discussion. And so, you know, there was a lot of support for Democrats this year, but a lot of it was because they wanted to have a check on the president and the president's party.
Yeah.
And so, so that's one level. The next level beyond that is people just being very concerned that the country seems more divided than ever, and there's this gnawing kind of fear that the things that divide us could be more powerful than the things that bring us together. And I think that makes people very anxious and worried.
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid the president is driving that division.
I think that's what people feel.
Yeah. So is there any action that the state of Minnesota can undertake to help correct things in Washington, in the federal government?
Well, I don't know that we can't directly change the federal government, but we are the only divided legislature, as I said. And I think that creates an opportunity for us to show that Democrats and Republicans can be effective in working together. We are not going to agree on a lot of things. There are going to be big chunks of our Minnesota Values Plan that Republicans just are not going to be interested in doing. And their agenda is not, a lot of what they want are not going to be things that we like. But where we overlap and where we can find points of common agreement, I do think the focus will be on doing as much of that as we possibly can. Last legislative session, there was a big omnibus bill that contained lots and lots of provisions, many of which were not controversial, and they were bipartisan, and it got vetoed over the big fight over a budget, over the big issues. And instead of having putting everything in that fight, we should do as much of the work that we share in common. We should do as much of that work as we can and not leave anything on the table if we can help it. And then we can disagree on on those other things.
It seems to me these omnibus bills that deal with so many topics are just violating the standards. Doesn't the Constitution of the state prohibit that?
There is a limit on what you can do, and there is in the Constitution. It's called the single subject rule. And it is definitely true that omnibus bills have gotten carried away.
Yes.
The single subject rule was written in the Constitution at a different time. We're still a part-time legislature, but the scope of what we engage in now is much greater than what they did in 1858. We've got a $45 billion budget that deals with 6 million people, and federal programs coming in that we have to address, state, local, higher education. I mean, you name it. There is so much that we do, and we have a limited number of days per year to work under the Constitution. Yeah. So some of our bills do have to get combined together. That's just a function of workload and time. Some of them have to go together.
So maybe I shouldn't mount a revolution to
well,
single issue legislation.
But it's become abusive when you put things that are not even remotely related to each other. Usually what we do is have major appropriation bills. So everything related to K-12 education and the budget will come together in one big bill. And then we'll have more individual policy bills that aren't related to the budget that go separately. So the finance bill is still an omnibus bill, and that I think is the only way and the proper way to function. And then you do separate bills that are policy. What happened last year is they took all of the finance bills for every agency, every department, every line of spending. They put it all together in one massive bill. And that is where the abuse has gone too far.
Well, yeah. the governor almost had to veto that because of some of the provisions. But if it had been separate bills,
a lot of it would have gone through.
yeah,
And that's, in fact, we have there's kind of a timeline at the legislative session. So we go January to May. And so what we're focused on is until we get final economic projections at the end of February, we're trying to pass as many of those bills that went through the omnibus process last year and got vetoed that are non-controversial. We're trying to move as many of them as we can.
good. So you're picking up the pieces.
Trying to, yeah, moving as quickly as we can on that.
And, I had the impression that you are working very well with the Speaker of the House, Representative Melissa Hortman, who comes from this area.
Yep.
To achieve the goals of the DFL caucus. Do you have any further comment on that?
Well, Melissa, the Speaker, and I, we've worked together for a long time in the House. She was there 2 years before I was, but we were pretty new legislators when I first got to office. We're both lawyers. We both have some business experience in our backgrounds. And, I think we're both pretty pragmatic. And so we work well together. And the Speaker is the #1 job and has really the ultimate responsibility. My job is to be a good partner with her and to help make sure floor sessions work well, that the Rules Committee that I chair does its job, and to help make sure that our House DFL caucus works well as a team. And so we work well together, and so far we work pretty well with the Senate Republicans too.
Great. That sounds like a recipe for progress.
I think I'm very optimistic.
Now, what makes the new House majority unique? Is there something different about it?
Well, it is a very diverse caucus in the kind of every sense of the word. We're almost half women, so we're just about 50-50. We have 7 legislators who come from refugee families. So we have 5 Hmong American legislators, and we have 2 Somali American legislators. We have the only caucus or part, that really represents all parts of the state, from rural and small towns in greater Minnesota to the urban core, suburban and outer suburban areas. We really represent all parts of the state.
And some Native Americans?
And some Native Americans, that's true.
And including our Lieutenant Governor.
Lieutenant Governor, but there are also at least 2 Native American members of the House.
Good. So, is there any other uniqueness?
Well, I think people talk about one Minnesota and kind of bringing everybody together. We think of ourselves as the one Minnesota caucus, where there's almost nobody in the state who isn't represented in some way by us.
Well, so there still will be challenges. What challenges do you anticipate in this session in trying to move the first 10 bills that I guess arrive? They're all connected with the Minnesota Values Plan, aren't they?
Well, there are challenges. Working with a divided legislature is not easy. I'm optimistic that we can do a good job, but it isn't easy. The budget cycle or the budget forecast going ahead is going to be challenging with economic slowdown and the provider tax that I talked about. So those are real challenges. And then as far as our caucus goes, I actually feel very optimistic that we'll work together very well. We have an amazing group of new legislators who were elected for the first time this year. People who are very talented and have great professional careers, who took time out because they felt they had to do more to serve the state and serve our country and our communities, and are just dedicated, hardworking public servants who could be doing other things but chose to commit themselves to this work. And from all parts of the state, we had an incredible group of new people coming in, that makes me very optimistic about the future. And so far, that isn't a problem. It is only a good thing.
Yes, and there are some issues that are dividing the new majority, such as marijuana legalization.
Mm-hmm.
And how will you, as a majority leader, navigate these differences? Are they to unite the caucus?
Well, first of all, we have a lot of conversation. We get together in a big room, and it's kind of open forum, and everybody who wants to have a chance to speak gets a chance to speak. And we run a pretty open operation. We don't keep secrets or keep too much power concentrated in leadership corner kind of politics. We keep it pretty open. And I think by having it open and having it an open dialogue, people have a chance to get to know each other and get to know each other's points of view. And so we don't all agree on medical or on marijuana legalization, but we are able to have a conversation about it as a caucus, and people can understand that even if they don't agree, the people who they disagree with are coming forward in good faith. It's just a difference of opinion. And so by trying to identify as early as we can where differences of opinion might arise, we can help people to work together over the course of the next 4 months to resolve them as much as possible. And maybe sometimes we can't, and there's a vote, and some people don't vote with the caucus, and that's okay too. We have to recognize that not everybody has to be in lockstep, but we do have to function well together. And I think building a cohesive team where people kind of believe in each other, and they want to work together, and they see the value in each other, I think that is where you help deal with differences of opinion, by building strong relationships.
I like that approach. That really sounds like a democratic process working.
I'm trying to set a higher standard for how we operate than what has been done before. I really believe that Minnesota is one of the most promising places for people to work together and resolve differences and be practical and just focus on getting something done. I do think we have a chance here.
In 1970, when I had the choice of anywhere in the world to live, that was the key that drew me to Minnesota. People work on resolving problems before they get out of hand.
Yes, and we're not perfect. We make mistakes,
right?
But we do better than most places.
Yeah.
Year in and year out, we do a little bit better, and you see that in the way we have, our incomes are higher, our quality of life is higher. We're one of the healthiest states,
and we attract corporate headquarters.
Yes. Now,
many big businesses.
That's all for the good. We also have huge racial disparities that make us among the worst states.
Does the House have some ideas on how to solve that?
Well, we're going to, first of all, our Great Start initiative for early learning and childcare for 0 to 3 is part of it.
Oh, yes.
Part of the disparities come from poverty and insecurity, economic insecurity, and so we're going to focus heavily on economic security issues like paid leave and affordable health care.
Yeah.
And then there's just the straight race issues. For example, that we have immigrants in our state who are not, don't have documents, and they're working, they're contributing, they're a part of our daily lives, and they can't drive legally anywhere. They can't get a driver's license. So that means they don't have to take a written test. They don't have to have, the driver's safety requirements. They can't get insurance, and that's a huge burden on our society, and it's a burden on them, and it makes life impossible, even though we want them to keep working here. So I will be carrying a bill to create an opportunity for immigrants, regardless of their status, to be able to get a driver's license. So that's
the training
that goes along with that. So that's just one small part of how I think we need to show that while we have these national debates about immigration, we have people living and working in our communities today. We need to welcome them. They're already part of the fabric of our lives, and we need to bring them into the mainstream of our society and not keep them in the shadows. And I think that is a vital part.
Including the kids who were brought here by their parents.
By their parents.
And with no documentation.
Right. People didn't used to need documentation to come to the United States. It used to be a land of open immigration.
Yes.
So there's nothing terribly new in this. But the way we treat people and the way that we integrate them into our society and into our community life will decide whether or not we can be successful together going ahead.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were in Belgium for 2 years, and that is an epicenter for diplomatic residency.
That's true.
In reflecting on your time away, what can you take away from the experience to help you lead in this new role of majority leader?
Well, one of the things you see from being outside our country is how much the rest of the world expects us to lead, and that there is no other nation that can do what we do. In fact, even if we don't want to be leaders, we are. And so the question for us is, do we lead with a good example of what a open society based on democracy and freedom and the rule of law can function well together, can deal with big challenges like climate change and economic inequality and race and multiculturalism, all these things that can either be great strengths if we handle them well, or they can be very destabilizing for us if we don't handle them well. And so I view my small role in Minnesota in the global scheme is to show that there is one part of the United States that can function well together, and maybe that can lead other states to see it the same way and kind of move us in a more positive direction, because the world is looking at us.
Right. Ryan, I think I have to have you back here a number of times so that we can teach the rest of the country. You brought home a lot from not just Belgium, but the European Union, headquartered there.
And NATO.
And NATO.
Our alliances and the international order that we helped to bring to
Very
life
important.
after the war,
Yeah.
after World War II. A lot of that is in Brussels, where I was able to spend 2 years, and it was a fascinating place to spend some time.
And NATO means North Atlantic.
Treaty Organization.
Yes.
So it's our primary military alliance with our partners in Western Europe and Canada.
And it's worked so well for so long. I'm appalled at what's happening at the federal administration.
Right. It has worked well. I think the concern that other countries are free riders on our military and diplomatic and security and intelligence and all sorts of things, and they're not paying their kind of way, I think we could have a discussion about that.
Mm-hmm.
But destroying the alliance and trashing the people involved because of it is not the way to do it.
Right.
So I understand the concern, but there's just no replacement for the U.S. and its leadership.
My gosh, we're almost out of time. Can we go on for a while?
Well, I don't have too much more to say.
Okay. What's your last word?
My last word is please be in touch with your legislators.
Yes.
Come to the Capitol, send us emails, write letters, make phone calls. Let us know how what we're doing affects you.
On behalf of the many other Minnesotans, I agree.
Thank you, Bill.